Greetings, welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel for our third video in the How to Make Rabbit Sticks Non-Returning Boomerangs series. This is very much a series that builds on itself. The first video we covered the whole kind of world scope context of non-returning boomerangs, rabbit sticks, really aerodynamic hunting sticks would be the most generic term, and how these have been used worldwide as a hunting tool. We talked about the physics of what makes them work and all of that background information. The second video, we covered the wood selection and what goes into picking wood for making one of these items, different characteristics, and how to think through, finding a blank that can actually give you the right shaped object. This one, we're going to talk about reducing pieces of wood to make a blank that can then be tuned and finished. Tuning and finishing will be the fourth video. And in this one, we're going to talk about two different ways and strategies of making a blank from raw stock. The first is going to be taking, if I can get it further, is this in view well? I love it, thank you. Taking a board. So if you have a really large log and you can get it to a bandsaw mill, you can cut it into boards. And this log gave me several boards, and this is one that I've already, this little variation, we talked about this in the first video, came from right about there in a different board from this particular log. I'm dropping things that I had cut up. So that's one strategy. The other strategy is to take a natural crook, such as this, and this is what I have made most of my sticks out of, natural crooks, and reduce this and get the most out of it possible. Okay, so we're going to make some blanks from boards. We're going to make some blanks from this natural crook. Come along if you're interested in continuing this journey with us. Now for this video, we've already gotten a couple of pieces out of this log. This being a basically finished one. I just need to actually put finish on it. This is a blank, Carly blank, and we're going to make a third from this piece. Okay, so this is a piece cut from the curvy end, one of these boards. Okay, then I ripped it down the middle. You can see I'm avoiding, let me switch sides here. I'm avoiding a few knots right there, and there are a few cracks down here at the end. So I just ripped it with a jigsaw, borrowed the use of a hand tool. Okay, or a power tool there. I ripped it with a jigsaw, just avoiding, staying as close to the middle as I could while avoiding those defects. Okay, this is the blank we're going to use. This we're not, because I have a defect right here, and a defect here, and that's not long enough. Okay, so this does not have a Carly in it, but this has a Carly in it that should look very much like this. Okay, so we're going to start with the early stage reduction to get this into a blank capable of making one of these. I'm going to go set up my workbench, and we'll rejoin in a sec. This raw board and this blank are from two adjacent slices of the same log. Okay. Same section, same log, just two different slices. This is a finished blank that has not yet been tuned, yet I know throws well enough and balances well enough, if I can find the balance point right there, that it can be tuned. What we want to do is take this board and get it to this stage. Now, as we are evaluating this piece, we want to accentuate the turn. So if we just think about where we want to take mass away, we want to take mass away from the inside of the curve on the bottom, okay, and then from the corners on the opposite side at the two ends. Okay, so taking mass from here, here, and here is what will accentuate that curve. Now we want to make sure that the grain is contained within this, right? We can't get cross grain. So if I just kind of take my pencil and sort of trace the center with the grain, just kind of follow a ring around. It's right about there. Okay. So it's not quite dead center, but as long as I don't cut through that line, I'm not going to have cross grain. And I'm in no danger of cutting through that line by accentuating a little bit here and a little bit here. And I'll probably leave this full thickness or close to it. Now, as we're doing this, we want to look for problems. So here's a problem there, this knot. Okay. But that only goes down to about there. And if I carry that over here, that's well within the area that I was going to trim off anyway. Okay, so that's a non-problem problem. That'll just go away. And I've got a little bit of a problem here. So as I think about, I'll lose a ½ inch there. As I think about how the end of this is probably going to end up. Okay. The end will be just inside of that, and that's not too big a deal, and it doesn't even really go all the way through on that side. Okay. There's a little bit of a blemish here, but again, if I'm bringing that roundness out to show where that is, right, that's going to kind of mostly go away in making this nose. There. Okay? So we can easily work around our problems. Now we want to get into this piece systematically. I like to start at the handle, because if you don't have a comfortable place to grip and throw, you're defeated before you even get started. So I want to put an extra clamp down there, and I'll clamp this here. 2 tools. We only need 2 tools. We need a draw knife, and we need a rasp. It's really all we're going to need for this. For all of this coursework, I'm going to start with the draw knife. This is black locust, but even though it's a really hard, heavy wood, it doesn't resist the draw knife. So it's really easy to hog out really big chunks. Okay. When you get to these knots, just kind of figure out where the grains go and then pick at them. And they'll come. Often, you can get the draw knife under them, just kind of pop them out at a certain point, just like that. Stuff cuts like butter. It's amazing. It's one of the heaviest, hardest woods that we have here in my area. But it cuts like butter with the draw knife. You want a nice round transition to that handle piece. Now, I felt it starting to catch. Don't pop it up or you can get a big chunk out. When it catches like that, out toward the end and relieve what is catching on. Okay? So I'm going to have to be careful here. This grain is running out right there. It's cooperating on either end, but I need to even that out down that way a little. Okay. Now, our first problem is gone, and that's where we're going to grip it. But obviously, that's not going to be a nice grip. So, it's going to be a little bit snaky like this one is. I'm going to kind of trace. I don't care what that end is doing right now. I just want to give myself a bit of a mark. There's a pencil. as to where I need to go with the handle. Okay. There's that line, and there's that line. So I want to mark that on the end there and here. So I'm not going to go past that or past this. Little removal in the wood there. Shave it down. Now, as you're working these, pieces that make good boomerang blanks are pieces that grew crooked. Pieces that grew crooked tend to have wild grain. You always got to be careful and look for those transitions. Right there's the grain switching on me. And that's the base of that knot. So there was a transition there between the wood from the branch, the wood from the branch coming in and the wood from the trunk overlapping it. That always gives you a wild grain section. Okay? Making progress. I'm going to take a little bit from the top now. And I'm going to ignore this knot. I'm going to start in front of that. Figure out where the grain goes here. Ooh, that's going to be real gnarly in that section. When it gets hard, use the draw knife to take out the corners. That top section was just cutting like butter. Here, the grain is oriented different, cutting with more difficulty. So I'll take the corner, leave a ridge, and then come in after the ridge. Okay. And now I have a low spot there. I can work down into it. This is almost acting like end grain right here. We're starting to get there. So, starting to get in there. I'm going to need to remove it quite a bit more. I'm going to leave it a little over thick for this moment. That's a scratch, not a crack. Okay. Now, I want to work on this top a little bit, because this top line, I want to bring the bottom toward the top line, not vice versa. I have a little bit of a crack in here, which goes in along that mark to about there. Okay, so this piece is broken free. That has to come out. So knowing that has to come out, I'm going to take it out, and then even everything off down to that spot. Just excavating here till I find the bottom of that crack. There it is. Okay. That's okay. That was a good split because that showed me where the crack went. Now I want to carefully, and I've got wild grain again. You have to work from both directions on these. Dug in. It's okay. We're cutting this off anyhow, so that didn't hurt me. But that's going to dig in there like crazy. Okay. I'm going to stop working there for now because I've got problem grain. Come this direction. Even this out. That is a big wiggly in the grain right there. Okay. Let's see where we are. So there's our even curve across the top. Now, we've worked around the problems. We know basically where our handle is, although it's too thick still. We know where this is. So now we just need to kind of sketch in a smooth transition. That's showing up on the camera, beloved?
Yes.
This line? Okay, good. So I'm going to very carefully remove this bit of wood there. That's the waste. Okay? Now I'm going to make this, I want this to, this is about the thickness I want. It's about three of my fingers of thickness. Okay? So I'm just going to come, there it already is, there it's good. Here, I'm going to mark that. Okay. Here I'm going to mark my thickness. Mark my thickness. And that's going to come in there. So I'm going to very carefully remove this with the draw knife, that with the draw knife, and then we'll come back and look at it. So we have gone from a very dreary high 30s and raining day to a beautiful 60-degree and glorious sunshine day. So we're going to toss this stick around. You can see I've cut the profile. Okay. We have our widest, our 3-finger width out here at the tip. I cut maybe a ½ inch or so right off of the tip because of that knot. And then I just tapered it smoothly down into the handle section. And that's all I've done to it. It is still completely square in the cross section. But at this stage, we can do our boomerang test. Will it flip? Yes. Okay. Will it balance in the middle? Yes. Okay. So this is a piece with the balance and the curvature that can make a good boomerang. Now, when I throw this, and I am going to throw it here, you can take it out with no more shaping than this and give it a toss and just see if it balances. Now, this is twice the weight that it needs to be. Okay? And this is a horrifically bad surface for ballistic coefficient. So we're only going to get 10, 20 feet, right? We're not going to get a big long throw. This is not a long range stick yet, but you can see the balance. So if I just give it a good toss, it has nice balance. It has a little bit of glide. Okay. Now, I highly, highly, highly recommend that when you're making your boomerang, at this stage, where you have your blank, you know it balances, you know it has a little bit of glide, go get a sheet of ½ inch plywood. Trace the exact profile of the boomerang that you're making, especially if this is your first one and you're learning the skill and the craft. Trace the exact boomerang that you're making about 3 or 4 times and cut out 3 or 4 blanks of pine. You need to be able to throw the boomerang properly before you're able to see how it throws and tune it. And I want to recommend that you do that practice with a stick that's not going to go a country mile. Okay? So let me grab this one, this finished one. When you're throwing, there's two parts. There's the sidearm action, and then there's wrist flip. And those have to go together. Okay? So this is a fully tuned boomerang that goes well. If I throw it with sidearm action but a stiff wrist, it doesn't do anything. Terrible flight. We have to have it spin. It has to spin to fly. Okay? So the wrist flick by itself, if I just hold my arm straight and just do the wrist flick, you have that rotation. Now, to actually throw the thing, you need to have it cocked back in your wrist, sidearm forward, and then flick the wrist out at the last minute with the boomerang pointing at your target at the moment of release. Okay? This is tricky to coordinate. And it's very easy to sidearm action, wrist flick, hang on to it a little bit too long and end up tossing it behind you. Okay? So at this stage of the game, we don't want a stick that's going to go a long distance to be your I'm learning how to throw stick. Mm-hmm. You see from that one that's 10 meters or so away from me, that I can get that gliding flight with a completely untuned square blocky stick. Okay? Do that. Do that. Because if you're throwing this and it goes off behind you, you don't want it go in some cockeyed stupid direction and hitting trees and breaking, or hitting buildings and breaking windows. You want a stick that's going to stay fairly close to where you throw it for your practice. Also, if you're just doing this for a bunch of practice, you can make 3 or 4 of these cheap, disposable, boomerang-shaped objects. Practice your throw, get that down, and you're not going to be running 80 or 100 meters away every time to pick up your stick. Right? That's an efficient practice. So it's good to have a little collection of short-range sticks that exactly match your boomerang. Okay? I did this when I was learning, and I am very much glad I did. Because the first couple I made weren't working, and I wasn't sure if it was bad design of the boomerang or my inability to throw. So I stopped what I was doing, I made some plywood mock-ups, I learned how to throw, and then I came back to it and was successful. Okay? So we always, especially in modern instant gratification culture, want to think about the finished object and jump right to it. You got to stop doing that. Okay? You have to go through the steps, you have to go through the learning process. You're not a person who was raised with toy boomerangs as an infant and knows them intimately and can just jump right to the finished product, right? If you're watching this, you're a person who was raised in modern skill-deficient society, and you're relearning these. You have to go through the steps to get to where you want to go. And then when you have the throw right, and you have the stick shaped properly, then we can get a nice gliding throw from our stick. Okay? Now, the next thing we want to do, this is that second stick from the other board. It's not quite as much bend and a little thinner in the tip, but it's pretty darn close to identical to the one we just had. We're going to do a little bit of work to round off the edge, not to fully tune it, but to set ourselves up for the tuning process. And once you have this rounded, we'll get a little bit more distance just due to a better glide shape and better ballistic coefficient. Okay? Still not a long-range stick. It still doesn't have that gliding, sailing flight that the fully tuned one does, but it's about twice as far as the completely blocky square stick. That's your next stage of practice. Once you get good at throwing the square sticks and you know you're not going to launch them into something, take those 4 square pine sticks, just give them a round profile. Okay? Just a, true lenticular symmetrical profile, and start tossing those. When you get good at throwing those, take your nice, natural crook, partly finished boomerang out of storage and start working on the next step with it, and I'll show you how to do it. We're here, we've checked it, we've made some plywood replicas of it, we've learned how to throw it, we've got a good throwing arm, and we're ready to start to proceed. Now, in this video, we're not going to fully tune it. We're going to set up a blank that is kind of at this stage, right? So you can see we still have sawn surface here, we have sawn surface here, but I've started to build my profile close to where I think it will be when it's tuned. Now we want to look at our thickness, and this is right about 5/8 inch. These were cut with a 3/4 inch setting, but it's 3/4 inch minus a kerf, right? So that's where we end up with our 5/8. And that's a very nice thickness to start with. This is going to be closer to 1/2 inch when it's done. It's not going to be all the way down to 3/8 because this is not a top tier wood. Okay, if this was a top tier sinks in water super duper heavy wood, yes, 3/8 or would be kind of the target thickness, a shy of a 1/2 inch. This is going to be closer to a 1/2 inch. So I'm expecting to take an 1/8, maybe a strong 1/8 off in most of it. I want to leave this section here, about where my fist is, right in there, almost full thickness. So I have a bit of a weight forward impact. Okay. I'm going to want the tip to flare toward the top so that the tip scoops air and gives lift on the tip. And my handle is the thickness I wanted, so I don't want to remove any thickness in the handle. Okay. Now, it's very easy to lose track of where you are. This is an asymmetrical item, and it has handedness. Okay. So we want overall a plano-convex form, which is that, right? Convex on the top and plane on the bottom. That's the net shape that we're going to be going for. But referencing back to the first video again, there's contours we need to put into it. We can't just do that across the whole thing and have a perfect item. On the trailing edge, we're going to want to cut in the back because that helps stabilize the flight and prevent veering off. And it's not hugely dipped. It's dipped plenty enough that we have that balance, okay? But it's not like it's a big 90 degree, okay? If you have too much airfoil, it will have completely unstable flight. So it's going to be roughly plano-convex, but it's going to be modified a little bit right here, this being the trailing edge, right, with that being pushed a little bit more up. So it's not perfectly plano-convex. And we want to scoop out the nose. So the first thing is, I'm a right-handed thrower. I'm currently holding it here in my right hand. Tip throws forward, right? This is the throw direction, like that. So I want to right top in that, okay? Top, bottom, okay? Now, the next thing I need to do is find that balance point precisely. It's right about there. So I'm going to put a mark here. I'm going to transfer that all the way around. Okay. That's my balance point. Now, since this is the throw direction here, this is leading edge, and that's trailing edge. Okay? Forward of that balance point. Now, reverse of that balance point, it's backwards. So since this is leading edge here, that's trailing edge. Since this is trailing edge here, that's leading edge. Okay? Mark those. Grip it with your hand. If you're going to do the Hopi rabbit stick style handle, grip it with your hand and kind of mark the handle there. Okay, so that's going to be about my handle region. Now this handle region is going to be just rounded off to an oval that's comfortable. Okay, and then I'll ease in to the other dimensions. Before I do anything else, I just want to mark an approximate center line. Along the whole piece. This doesn't have to be perfect. Your eyeball is going to be good enough for this center line. Because remember, we're not carving this for a final tune. Okay. We are doing the preliminary work to set up for easy tuning. But at the same time, I want to cut my bevels pretty darn close to where they're going to be, right? Because if I cut this way uphill and then I round it all, I carve these edges into the, plano convex form, and then I need to move it a lot, right? As I move it, I'm losing edge, I'm losing width, and it is pretty darn close to the width that I would prefer. It's exactly the width I would prefer. So, I don't mind if I lose a few millimeters here and there. That's not going to affect anything, but I don't want to lose, half a centimeter somewhere. Okay, so I want to get fairly close to where I'm going to end up. And to do that, here on the leading edge, I'm going to remove this material, okay, and I'm going to remove this material down to that center line, but I'm going to overshoot the center line a bit and go about 2/3 of the way through my blank, from the top down on the leading edge. That way, that edge of attack is kind of like that on the leading edge. And then on the bottom, I'll round up to it. Okay? On the trailing edge, I'm going to do the same thing, but backwards. So on the trailing edge, I'm going to take this material from the bottom. I'm going to overshoot and take away that line, so I'm favoring the top. Okay? And then on the top, I'm going to come over, if I think about another midline here, on the leading edge, I'm going to overshoot the middle and take that material on the leading edge. Okay? And then from here down, I'll take that on the trailing edge. And then all of those things are true down here. Now, to do this removal, some of this you can do clamped normally in a vise. But a lot of this you're going to need to do flat. Okay? So in order to do that, where'd my stick go? There's my stick. A trick is clamp a board in your vise. Okay? And then you can use these craft, I just call these squeezy clamps. I'm sure there's a better name for them, the squeezy clamp. But we can clamp this on here and then work on this surface. Okay? So just to demonstrate that a little bit, like I said, I know I'm going to scoop the tip out, and I'm going to scoop the tip out back to about here. And I'm going to come back about a hand width and scoop the tip out. So if I squeezy clamp this, gotta love the old ways rising farm technical terms. Okay. Now that's held strong. Now I can use two tools. If the grain is cooperative, I can do this with the draw knife. But at this stage, you really, really don't want to blow out a big chunk because of eccentric grain. And this has a lot of curl in it. So I recommend you do most of this with the rasp. Okay? And you can put a lot of down pressure and really dig in because we have it squeeze clamped. Okay? So I am going to go off camera, use the combination of these tools to shape the leading edge and this tip scoop. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. There's that first set of contours. So here, leading edge is to the back on the rear section, to the front on the front section. Okay? And you can see how I've taken this arc past the halfway mark on the top in both of those cases. Okay? If you look at the edge, I've taken over about 2/3 of the edge here, and let me point that way, scooped out the tip in a fairly pronounced way. Okay. Now, the other strategy is you can carve this dead flat and then steam bend that, right? But I have enough material to work with, so I'm just starting it here. If it needs steam bending at the end of the day, sure. But I doubt that this one will. We will see. Okay? Now, here on the trailing edge, let me just kind of refresh my T there. The same thing's going to happen, except that this time I'm taking away this material. Okay? And I'll be coming past the halfway mark on that section of the bottom. Okay? And taking away that corner. Okay. And then again, the mirror. This is the trailing edge. So I'll be coming past halfway and taking out that. And then a little bit past halfway and taking out that. So I'm going to take out this corner. Okay? I'll do this and show you what it looks like when that's done. These are the leading edges we looked at previously, and now we've cut the trailing edges pretty much to match. Okay. Little bit of a steeper slope going back than on the leading edge side. We haven't done anything to alter or mess up the scoop in the nose. And if we look at the boomerang balance here, you can see at this stage it won't throw. Okay, it wants to tip over. Either side. So that it won't stay that way. Okay, we'll fix that. That's because we've cut off wood so that it's now cut basically at an angle. Okay? So what we need to do is to go and take the rest of these edges down to this spot that we determined. Okay? And when we do that, like here in the middle where it kind of makes these little S-bends where we go from one face to the other. Can I see that? We'll just smooth that out and even that out. Okay? And then we'll meet out in the field and we'll throw it one last time for this video. So we've got two blanks that are pretty closely matched pair. This is the one we had just been doing. You can see it's nice, everything's evened up. And our balance point is back to where it should be. Okay? Now, I'm going to throw these here, but I want to talk about them for just a second first. They still need a lot of work. This is very, very rough, and neither of them are going to be a long-range stick because they're still way too fat. Okay? We need to remove, boy, the wind's coming up. We need to remove at least 1/3 of this material. Can you grab the kitty cat, please? Life with farm animals. Anyway. We need to remove at least 1/3 of the material from here, minimum. Now, this one, the first one, does not have enough lift. And you can see that if I throw it. It's going to follow a ballistic trajectory rather than a glide trajectory. Okay? So when I give this a chuck, you see, it doesn't really glide. It's got good aerodynamics, good forward motion, good rotation, but it goes up and then falls like a hand-thrown stone. Okay? This one has a little bit too much lift. It does glide if you throw it just right, but if you tip it any, or if the wind catches it even a little bit, it flops and loses stability. So we'll see how it does here. Okay, you see how it lost stability there a little bit. Okay? That's too much lift. Neither of them is fully tuned. This is where we have made our piece, we know it can work, we know it's basically working, and now we need to iron out these details. The one, we need to reshape the edges slightly so that it gets more lift. The other, we need to take away some of the lift that it has, and we need to thin them both down, finish them, carve fluting, and get finished long-range boomerang. This is the same crook that I was showing, the one that's almost 90 degrees that I was showing in the earlier videos. The only thing I've done off camera at this point is just lopping it off a little bit short. Now, that's just to make it more manageable. If I stretch a tape on this, sewing tape is still handy, I'm probably going to cut some off of this end. Is this in view, beloved? Okay.
No.
No? I will move it. View now? Good. I'm probably going to lop a little bit off of this end. This kind of has a little bit of propeller twist in it over in this direction. It's going to be hard to cut truly square. I'm just going to ignore that for now and leave it on. If I were to use all of that, that would be 28 inches, that's just fine. But if I come down, to about where that little scar is, that'll be about 25 or 26 inches or so. And that'll be a very good size for this. My goal for this piece is to make a completely symmetrical pair of sticks that could be thrown either right or left hand, because somebody very important to me who might be behind the camera right now is lefty. In order to tune the thing, I have to be able to throw it, and I can only throw righty. There is kind of a cheat way you can half throw it with the wrong hand, but it's not great. You really need to be able to throw it correctly to tune it. So hopefully this will come out and give me 2 blanks for a pair of completely symmetrical sticks that could be thrown either hand. Now, this side looks, just evaluating things, this side looks great, and I have a lot of material to mess with. I'm not expecting any major problems on this side of the blank. I will have to watch, if I tilt this up so you can see this contour, with the chalk. If I just chalk this off, okay, everything in here is going to be waste. So as I'm cutting to the middle, that's going to be here, disregarding that bump out. So sometimes when you're looking at natural, we'll get to cutting the middle in a minute, but sometimes when you're looking at a natural crook, you'll have these undulations, and you need to recognize that all of that is going away. So when I'm evaluating where to put my cuts, I need to disregard that right from the start. Okay? If you have trouble doing that, if you can't do that in your eye, cut that off before you do anything else. Okay? Just get rid of it. Okay? You know it's going to go away. Just get rid of it. But that'll give me plenty of space and a healthy 2 centimeters or so on either side. So that's the only thing I need to consider on this face that's going to be odd. But on this face, we have some issues. This is a rot pocket, and if I look, it's not very deep, right? It just kind of goes in about there, on the end grain, about there, okay? So I know that I have that issue. But if I look at this healing tissue that is folding in over, I probably have enough to make a full boomerang above that raw pocket. So I think I'll be able to work around that. But this is going to be the tricky one. And then if I make these 2 match, what my overall strategy will be is to get the best stick I can get of any detail out of this side, and then make the other side match, because I should be able to have plenty of stock to make the other side match. And this big bulbous thing and this big wide piece, whatever I end up with as my best stick on this side, I should be able to make a matching one out of the good side. Okay? So the very first thing we need to do is to cut this blank down. Okay? So remember, we're ignoring this bulbous pocket here. We're also going to ignore that on the other side. And I just want to position this, and my eye is not going to line up with yours looking through the camera lens. and find the center. Just trace the center with a chalk line here by eyeball. Okay. Now I want a half-inch thick stick at the end of the day. Give or take a little depending on how the tuning goes. So I have plenty of material to play with. Okay. Nice straight line there. Just going to stretch this out and just kind of check myself to make sure I maintained a nice straight line. And this is actually going to need to come over on the low end there. Cutting irregular objects is very tricky. Now, I'm doing that just on this limb, and I'm not considering how it lines up with the other limb. The same is going to be true here. I'm going to just go for the geographic center of this. On both sides. Pretty much irrespective of what the other one is going to be. Because, lines up nice on this side anyway, I have the ability to steam bend and straighten this out if it's wonky. Okay? It's nice. If those two limbs line up just perfectly, okay, great. If they don't, I can put some steam on this middle intersection, clamp it down to a board, and straighten them out like that. So I have tools to straighten a bent stick. So we don't have to obsess over that. Now I'm going to look where these lines fall and connect those two lines across the top here. Okay. And then the same across this end, which is a little trickier because that's wax. Now I'm getting chalk all over myself. I am pretty sure, though, that I will live and survive with a little chalk on my shirt. Okay. Now, there's our start. The next thing I need to do is be able to clamp this darn thing. And this is going to cause me some issues. So I'm just going to cut this branch here right off, get it clamped up so that we can do a cross cut. We have it in the vise, and okay, awkward, angular, lumpy, bumpy pieces like this, work holding is a pain in the royal neck. Okay. But you've got to figure it out. You take your vise. This one I have it in the vise, and I have it clamped down to the leg of the workbench, you know, in multiple spots. And the overhang lip here is locking it in one of the lumps, right? So you just got to kind of weave it in and work it in and figure out a way to get it to stay stable. When you're splitting a piece of wood like this, you have to recognize you cannot split this accurately with wedges. It will never work. There are woods that split very nicely. Ash splits very nicely. The ash crook boomerangs that I've made, I have split out. Okay, but even with ash, when you're in these angular pieces, especially, you know, like where you have a trunk to branch juncture, you have wonky grain and it's not going to go straight. Okay, where you have, you know, roots sticking out, all of those are places where it will not split right. Okay, so if I were to take this piece and try to split it, I definitely will not get two nice pieces. I might not even get one and might waste the whole crook, and that would be sad. Okay, so to split this, we're going to cut it with a handsaw. Okay, now this is going to be a long, difficult cut in very, very hard wood. This is hop hornbeam. Right? This is a very hard wood, so you want a good saw. Sadly, in the modern world, good pretty much means antique. You're going to have to go find one. I can't recommend a modern saw to you. I don't know a brand that makes a modern saw that is up to the challenge. This is an antique Diston. Okay, so go around, find these. You don't have to find Diston. There's a lot of good saw brands out there, and usually you can get these for pretty cheap. Put some work into them, resharpen them, and you'll have a good saw. Okay, but you need a rip saw. Just about all of the modern saws, this is a pruning saw, but still, most of the modern saws are cross-cut. The saws you go to the hardware store for, they're just for cross-cutting 2x4s and cutting chunks out of pieces of plywood. They're not made for this sort of work. You can still get some Japanese hand saws that are up to this challenge, right? But you're going to have to hunt around for a good rip saw. Sadly, in the power tool world, they just aren't made. They just aren't made for this anymore. Right? It's unfortunate, but you can get them if you hunt around, either an antique or a modern Japanese saw. There's a few boutique makers that are starting to make traditional panel saws again. I haven't used any of their work. I'm not saying, categorically that they're good or bad. I'm declaring my ignorance. I'm not saying there aren't good saws to recommend. I'm saying I personally don't know enough to recommend one to you, right? Because all of my saws are antiques, restored antiques. So learn how to sharpen a saw and go to yard sales, and you'll find stuff. You'll find lots of good stuff. But when we're cutting, when we're doing a long cut like this, okay, your saw has to cut straight. And that's in the sharpening. It's very common to hit something and take the teeth off of one side, so one edge is sharper than the other, and when that happens, it'll drift. Okay, if your saw is doing that, you have to resharpen and reset the teeth. Okay, and then when you're cutting this, you want to set it in the vise so that you can see down one flat and one end. Okay, we have our chalk mark there, and we're going to start the saw so that it lines up. This is a very sharp corner to be starting on. And we can watch down this chalk line on the face and on the end grain. Okay? And you don't cut. The rule is you're not allowed to cut where you can't see chalk line. So I will cut down here and down the end grain until my saw gets to the bottom. It's going to be cut off in your view, but right here where my finger is. Right. At that point, when I've cut across, all the way across the end grain, and probably at the angle I'm cutting about down to where this finger from my left hand is on the face, okay, then I will unmount this, okay, flip it around and mount it in the vise this way and do the same down this face. But now I have the saw locked into the end grain cut that I've already made over here, so it will follow on the back side. And you'll do that for a while, and then you'll flip it over. So you want to keep every few inches of progress, you flip your board, and that will even out and kind of cancel out your human error cutting it. Now, I'm going to go to a different vise to do this. This is the vise I have that's good for filming, but I have a wall right behind me, and I just can't pull my elbow back enough to make a straight cut. So the other vise I have is terrible for filming, but will give me a good cut. This vise is good for filming, but will give me a terrible cut. So I'm explaining the process, and I'm going to go do it off camera. See you back in a few seconds. Oh boy, that was a job. I've been working with this thing for a scale of half an hour. I didn't time it exactly. So you can see where I made the cuts, and you can see a couple places where I was doing that switching back and forth, cutting on this angle, and then turning it and cutting it from the other angle, turning it, cut it from the other angle. Okay. I ran into some big problems here on this knotty, gnarly end out at the root tip. And it became pretty quickly obvious that I was overly ambitious about trying to keep all of that length. And it was just too twisted, too many knots, and it was just impossible to get, to get a good sight line and get a straight saw cut in there. So I lopped a couple inches out, but it's still 23 inches tip to tip. I just lost a little bit of my potential for a truly symmetrical stick. But it'll still be good. We'll still get some good sticks out of this. The other problem that I had from this end worked beautifully. This fatter section, nice straight wood and a good saw, and it works great. But because I deflected, I got off my cut line here to a sufficient extent that it was just not possible to get back onto it. So you can see I cut down here, and I cut down here, and then I started in across this connector, and it was just binding the saw too much. There was no way to get further progress with the saw, so I split it. And often you can get away with that, splitting out the last little chunk, okay, especially since I knew there was a rot pocket here and that would weaken the heel of this thing. The problem is, as you can see in this piece, it dug in, the grain ran funny, and dug out that big chunk when I split it, right? This is why you can't just take a knotty, gnarly piece like this and split it from scratch. Even after cutting 90%, when I tried to split that last 10-20% out, okay, still went wild on me. If I had tried to split this from scratch, I would have had firewood. I would have nothing but kindling, okay? It's actually the next day. When you have something in the middle of your project that doesn't go quite the way you had envisioned it, right? Don't assume it's a disaster. Put it away, study it, come back at it the next day with a fresh brain, right? You can almost always come up with something that will work somehow. Don't flail at it. There's an instinct, something's going wrong. I will beat it into the condition that I want it in. Don't do that. Okay? It's never going to go well for you. Put it aside, think about it, study it, don't flail at it, right? So last night, I spent some time with the calipers studying each piece here. How thick was this in this tear-out section? And I've got all 3/4 or almost 3/4 between this tear-out section and here. And that will leave me with a 2-inch or so strip of wood to work with. When I carve this flat, I will still have a 2-inch wide strip of wood here. That's plenty to make a non-returning boomerang. Okay? What I can't do is flip it over this way and turn it into a left-hand one. Right? So I'm just going to go forward with this, make it a right-hand boomerang, but it will be a useful stick. So the next thing I need to do is get it globally flat-ish and see what I'm actually working at. Okay? It doesn't have to be perfectly flat. We just need it to be globally flat-ish. So to do that, I've got to take off this bulbous region here, okay? And I need to take this down so that the majority of this hollow has been removed, okay? And I do have plenty to work with. So, you know, if I throw this on here, this is 1.25 inches thick, okay? So I need to remove a lot of material from both sides. Because I had this tear out, I'm going to be forced to remove it preferentially from the bottom rather than evenly from both sides. That would give me more flexibility in design. As it is, the stick and circumstances have dictated design. Now, a last teachable moment about this before I dig into it is know your woods. Right? Remember I said at the beginning there was no way this was going to split. I thought I could split, I cut it to here, cut it to here, cut it across there, and I thought I could split out this little bit, and even that didn't go as planned, right? So yes, I was right. If I had tried to put a wedge in where my, wedge in here at the top where my finger is, and drive it down, this would have been shrapnel, and I would have gotten nothing useful, okay? If this was a piece of rock elm that I was working, or Chinese elm that I was working, this would have gone even worse, okay? This would have not done even what it did. If this was something like white oak or black locust, it would have gone a lot better, right? And it would have popped through this region, okay? It would have found a plane of weakness and split on it. Know your woods. Practice with your woods. Understand your woods. And if you're using a new wood that you haven't tinkered with before, or if you're new to woodworking in general, give yourself the mental space to fail at a couple of pieces, because you're going to need to tinker with it, learn by doing, and when you learn by doing, not everything is going to come out the way you imagined it at the start of your project. And that's okay. That's part of the learning process. So I'm going to go take, there he is, Mr. Draw Knife, and I'm going to start working this down. We've made some nice progress. So I took this lump off, right? It's still a little bulky here. It's very bulky here. On the back, carved it down so that most of that big divot from this piece that split up, can you see it? Most of the divot from this piece that split out, which was, there-ish. No, there-ish. I don't remember. Somewhere in there-ish. Has been removed. There's a high spot here. There's some rough stuff in. And I need to smooth this down a bit. But this is already throwing with pretty nice balance. You can see from the dirt, I gave it a couple of chucks here already. That is something I recommend you do. As you're working through one of these, chuck it every time you make an alteration. That's part of your learning process and part of evaluating how well you're doing. Now, don't get upset when you throw something that's still clunky, lumpy, rough, horrible wind resistance, and get upset when it only goes 50 feet, right? You're looking at balance. You're looking at does it rotate nice? Does it work well as a throwing stick, right? That's what you're looking at this stage, not can I get 100 meters with it, because you won't. I haven't entirely decided what I'm going to do with this back. I'll do something to make that a little nicer looking. We shall see. And I haven't really touched the top yet. So, thinking this through design-wise, the stick is dictating the design. Okay, I had to cut the end off here because it was just too gnarly to work with. That means there's an asymmetry, right? If I kind of do a crude finger line up here, right, it's about a hand wider on this end than this end, right? That means this is the handle. Okay. I have plenty of width in here for a good throwing stick. There's my red one, right? If I compare these, you can see it's still wider than most of the beam of this one, right? Plenty of width. Plenty of width to lose a little in the tuning process, but not enough width to flatten the top and completely turn the edge and put a dome on this, right? So that's what dictates this is a right-handed stick, because the stick told me so, okay? That's just how it worked. What would I do different? Just thinking it through at this stage for your benefit, right? Well, I would have tried to cut a little further before I tried to do that final split. I would do that different. But even though I would do that different, it hasn't really hurt me. Even if some of this lives in the final piece, that won't matter. It'll add a little bit of turbulence, just like the fluting here, if and only if it's sanded in nicely, right? So that will get sanded in nicely if it remains, but it won't hurt anything if it remains. So we haven't lost anything. If I put this on the bench and kind of balance it so it's kind of globally centered there, both wing tips are tipped up a little bit naturally, which is where I'm going to want them in the finished piece, so I'm not going to mess with that. And I have a big honking bit of mass here, so if in the tuning process I need to bring the wing tips down, all I'll need to do is file down the middle a bit, and I will effectively have lowered the wing tips, because I've got enough mass in the middle for that. Because all of this is dictated by the stick, you're not really choosing a design when you make one of these, right? You're looking for a stick that will fit a predetermined design, or a range of predetermined designs. How do you know what those are? You study the historic literature. So if you want help to do that, I have produced a compilation of historic sources which covers both these non-returning boomerangs and atlatls, and that is available on my Patreon. You can purchase it through the Patreon store, or just be a member and then you can download it for free at any membership tier. There's also the modern books that you can go out and buy, and those are all in the first video if you want to go and look at that. And there's a link to my Patreon at the bottom of the screen. So how do you know what's a good stick and what's a good design? You study all of the designs that have been made, and you tune your eye up to it. So the next thing I'm going to do on this is, I know I'm not going to need It's going to be a little hard for you to see. I know I'm not going to need all of this goober. So I'm going to round this off. I'm not going to do a whole lot of mass reduction here. I'm going to take the bark off, and this tip is really, really fat. I know I'm not going to need all of that. Okay, so I'm going to kind of shave from here out. I'm going to carve off that pink blotch. I'm going to carve off that pink blotch. I'm going to ease a couple of tough spots, right? Like that's kind of high right there. So I'm going to ease that off. And I'm going to take the bark off the whole thing. I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. I've taken all the bark off, flatten these across, flatten this a little bit more. If I put this, let me brush sawdust out of the way. If I put this on the bench, you can see how much this wants to stick up, right? So there is quite a bit of sway in it. Now that is tip up in both directions, and that helps it fly. I took this edge down a little bit off the top, and flatten that. You can see it here too. If I hold this one flat, then this end comes up. Okay. So I did throw this a couple of times, and the bugger already flies. In fact, it soars. It wants to go up. So this will be much simpler to tune than the other set. The other set, the problem is going to be stability, and that is foreshadowing. I've worked ahead on that set a little bit at this point. Huge stability problems because it has such a gentle bend. This one, because it has such an exaggerated bend, it flies very, very stable. Okay. The tuning on this one is going to be mostly focused on flattening it a bit and refining the flight path, because it already has a nice airfoil, as well as taking off the facets there, fluting it, rounding the tips, smoothing everything out, and all those little refinements that get you that extra yardage. Okay, so this is going to be a more straightforward, typical tuning experience than the flatter, gentler curve sticks. But we're going to leave both of these into the tuning video so that you can see how the different shapes compare to each other. I think that's useful, instructive, and good pedagogy to leave all of that in, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that you can learn from it all. Because when you're out hunting sticks, you're going to find good, bad, and ugly, right? That's reality, right? That's reality. So we're going to call this a blank. Now, when you get an awesome blank like this that you know is working and is working well, this is the point where you want to, especially if you're new at this process, this is the point where you want to walk away from your project for a couple of days. Don't blow right into the tuning if you don't already have skill at throwing. Okay? Even if you do, I still recommend you walk away from the project for a couple of days. Go get a piece of plywood and cut out 3 or 4 identical to what you've just made. Okay? Go learn to throw. We talked about this in earlier videos. I'm going to say it again, and I'll say it more in the future probably. Learn how to throw with a chunk of plywood, right? You're not going to be sad if you screw it up. You're going to be limited in range at which it will throw. So you're not going to go have a wild throw that goes wildly out of bounds or in a weird direction or too far ahead and hit something and hurt something or somebody, right? It's limited. It's controlled. Learn to throw under controlled conditions with a short range chunk of plywood. Then when you think you're good at throwing and you want to start tuning, tune your plywood first. Okay? Tune all 3 or 4 of those chunks of plywood. Learn what you're doing, and then go and tune your good crook. This, if I put the calipers on it, where are we here? We're at a little over a 1/2 inch. Almost, that might be finished thickness, probably will be for there. Little over a 1/2 inch. That might end up getting thinned down a little bit, I'm not sure. This is almost 3/4 inch. That definitely will get thinned down. And this is almost a full inch here in the middle. That absolutely will get thinned down. But I need to tune it and work with it and see how much tip flare I want, so I know whether to thin out of the middle here or the top here. Okay, I could thin this from either direction, and I don't know until I jump into the tuning process which direction I want to use that. Okay, so this You can pretty much do this by eye from looking at pictures. The tuning is where it gets tricky, difficult, complicated, and the tuning takes 2 or 3 times the length of time that it takes to make your plane. So if you find a great stick and it's dry and ready and you're raring to go, you can take it to this stage even before you're good at throwing the things. But don't try to tune it before you're good at the throwing things. Okay? And, you know, if this is the first great stick you've had, I still recommend that you make a plywood model and tune it first. It will tune with different angles than this because plywood is much less dense. They're not exactly apples to oranges, but it's good practice nonetheless. So, there's my recommendation. If you don't have a good stick, go start looking. You kind of know what these look like at this point from what we've done here on the channel and the sources that I've recommended to you and provided. And as you go about your week, see if you can find some sticks, go about learning, gathering materials, working on your projects, and we'll see you back here for tuning at Old Ways Rising Farm.